But if you can build in those blocks of recharging and that self-help and that self-care that a lot of people talk about, then you'll get to realize some of the benefits, which will then, of course, make you want more. For a lot of people, getting started is so difficult because, as you say, they're just so busy. And they look at their calendar tomorrow or next week and they see no openings, no possibility to do anything different with their life. And so it really is about your routine and your habits. And that's something I know is talked about a lot on this show. But it does come down to what is just a few things or just one thing that you can put into your life or take out of your life, take off your schedule, that would be helpful in terms of restoring a little bit of space so that you feel like you're not as busy.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Mark Briggs, who's going to talk about harmony in life and in work. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and create harmony to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. Today's quote comes from the book. It's from Scott Burkham. Time is the singular measure of life. It is one of the few things you cannot get more of. Knowing how to spend it well is the most important skill you can have. I'm amazed at how many people ignore time and don't value it. Having time freedom is so liberating. We're going to talk about the cult of busy today and how to step back and just be. It's an appropriate topic as we come to the end of another year. You will never get that one back. Before we continue, last week's action step was to find quiet time to check in with yourself about what do you desire. It's powerful to be clear on what you want from life, and we're going to chat about that again today. These themes all flow together. Do you have your 2022 plans in place? I spent 2 days locked up away from home to finalize 2022. And what I want from my life and my business and my family and everything else. It's something I'm going to do more often. I failed at doing it enough this year, and that won't happen in 2022. Thankfully, my mastermind group is holding me accountable and making sure that I get this done. The podcast is also finishing 5 years, and that's been an amazing journey. And for my next episode, I'm going to talk about those 5 years and what I've learned and what's kind of happened. So that's going to be a fun conversation. Stay tuned for that. Bottom line is you can define what your world looks like. The problem is that too many people don't know what they want and they don't feel like they have the power to craft that life. You can and you do. And today we're going to chat about that and what's important in work-life harmony. Our guest is Mark Briggs. He's a management consultant helping Fortune 500 companies modernize their operations, culture, and leadership by facilitating cutting-edge transformations. He's also a speaker, trainer, and consultant in the digital transformation and innovation. Mark worked with groups across the United States, Europe, China, and the Middle East over the past 15 years. He's the author of 3 books and a professor of leadership and change management at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Let's meet Mark. Welcome to Rich Your Soul, Mark Briggs. It's great to have you join us today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to learn from you. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Wow, that's a question I don't know that I've considered recently. I think that if I think about it, not a lot directly, certainly not school. I know that my parents taught me and taught my sisters that money was something that you needed to have enough of in order to create family, create joy, create happiness, to be able to pursue your interests. But we were not driven necessarily to achieve more than we needed for just sort of for that harmony of life. So one of the interesting money lessons that I got as a kid was when my parents scraped together everything they had to purchase 100 feet of frontage on Lake Coeur d'Alene in this beautiful corner of the state of Idaho where I grew up. And at the time, we really couldn't afford it. I was only 7 years old, so I've heard a lot of this later in life. And they were very determined to make it work somehow. My dad worked in the Forest Service for 35 years. My mom was an entrepreneur of all kinds of different roles and titles and jobs. And, they never really had excess. But what they built in that 100 feet of frontage, we ended up building a lake cabin. We go there 1 week out of the year with all the family, all the cousins, all the aunts and uncles. And it has been the most impactful piece of our family over the past 40 plus years. And it started with a little bit of money, but what it has turned into is really priceless. And the lesson that taught me is that it's not always about the numbers on the balance sheet. It's what are you getting from it? What's the ROI to your life, to your values, to the impact on your family and the things that are truly important to you. And so that's what I've used, I think, as I've thought about money over the years and on through my career.
He was a wise man to do that, right? Because it's not the money itself. It's how you use it to create. And you use the word harmony. And I don't hear people say that often. Do you know where that came from?
It's come from several conversations recently, most of them around my new book. And what I was writing about over the past couple of years and really pursuing and researching in my head felt like work-life happiness. But in recent conversations, and I mean in the last few weeks, I've heard the term work-life harmony more and more. And as I thought about your question, to go back through how I learned about money, what my parents really designed for us was a harmony of life, where we had time for family and sports and recreation and nature and, all of the good times that we shared together. We had enough money for that, but we didn't kill ourselves to go beyond that to get something that was just sort of superficial or material. It was all about, we got what we need in order to value, to find our values and really prioritize those values and make time for that.
You're in the right place, because that's exactly what this podcast is all about. In the beginning, we talked about, and you hear it before, it's work-life balance, but it's really hard to have balance, and people struggle with that. And that's why we stopped using the word balance and we started using the word harmony. It actually came out of one of the episodes where it's how you live life. All these different parts are going to go on. How do you create the beautiful song of your life? And it sounds like your father did that amazingly well with understanding a question that I still ask today, especially when I'm meeting people who are go, go, go. How much is enough?
Exactly.
Because it's a struggle for people.
Exactly. And I think that is one of the challenges that I certainly see working with clients and I work with a lot of news companies, and the news cycle in the last few years, of course, has been relentless. And it's very difficult to take a break, to go recharge your batteries, to know that you could come back as a better professional and a higher performer is one thing, but to actually execute the boundary to make time to go recharge and not go cover that next story, not look for that one more update on that story is really difficult for the people that I work with. And I see folks who struggle with this in other industries as well. I did a session last week for a group of 15 at Amazon. And that company, of course, has a culture where there is never enough. And so trying to help them with some tips on work-life boundaries became really challenging. But we did end up right where you said, work-life harmony, knowing that, guess what, there's going to be some 9 p.m. emails. There just are. But if you can walk away from the laptop at 5 or 6 o'clock, go take a walk, cook dinner for your family, and then come back to your 9 p.m. emails, that's harmony. If you work straight through and all of a sudden you look up and it's 9 p.m. and you're like, I wonder where my family is, that's not harmony.
Exactly. So let's kind of take a step back. Between you writing the book and you growing up this wonderful, idyllic lifestyle, was everything else perfect, or is there a story in there?
No, unfortunately, the script, as we like to say, kind of got torn up and thrown away along the way. I definitely had a pretty good start. Obviously, went to Gonzaga University in Spokane, got a journalism degree, and wanted to become a sports writer. And again, back to my parents' lessons about money, sports writers don't get rich. But for me, it was all about how much I enjoyed the job, how much I enjoyed the people, and just being around that culture that led me into that lifestyle. I eventually got a job as a sports writer and then realized, I don't really like this job. So it was one of those real quick. I understood that my trajectory, both in career and in life, was going to be a squiggly line. And so I had to get comfortable with the fact that there was going to be uncertainty and change. And that, thankfully, is something that I really enjoy. I went to graduate school at the University of North Carolina, got a master's degree in journalism so that I could teach in college someday. At least that's what I thought I wanted to do. Then I moved back to the Pacific Northwest, got married, had a couple kids. Everything seemed to be going along according to that script, as I mentioned. But then I ran into family strife, ended up in a divorce. Then I was a single dad, had my kids half the time. I ended up having a really long commute to Seattle to work at a TV station there. So things were tough. And I had to learn a lot about work-life balance, boundaries, and the like to be a really good single dad, enduring a long commute with a really demanding job. I ended up getting married again, thinking that was going to help solve the situation. And that actually turned out worse than the first one. So a very painful divorce followed. So within a span of a few years, what seemed like the script, according to plan, had taken a couple of really serious jumps off a cliff. So picking up the pieces and trying to put it all back together, I got a new job as a consultant, which allowed me to work from home. Even though I was traveling a lot, it definitely provided a lot more work-life balance. Allowed me to be with my 2 sons more. It allowed me to get out of that horrible commute. And I realized that I had learned a lot of things about balance and about sort of taking care of myself that was necessary because of the really dark days that I had lived through. I had to go to a lot of counseling. I had to read a lot of books. I had to do a lot of things and learn a lot that I didn't know 10 years ago. And as I got into this consulting job, I saw people and started working with people who were struggling with some of the same things. And suddenly I had all these resources and these tools to help them with. And that's eventually what led to me writing the new book.
So that's kind of my next question. What inspired you to write the book, The Butterfly Impact: Resilience, Resets, and Ripples?
Well, it definitely came out of the pandemic for sure. But it started before that when I started working with a bunch of large market TV stations in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, et cetera, and helping them. My job was to help them modernize their operations. So to really transform the organization, to be able to perform at the top level in these new emerging platforms, such as mobile phones, social media, obviously the website, which has been around forever. And then all of a sudden streaming video on Roku and Apple TV came along. So these really dominant TV news brands that had been, successful for a very long time, all of a sudden had to figure out new ways of succeeding in these new areas. And so my job was to help them do that. And at first, it was all about the content. It was all about the output. But as I started trying to help these teams come up with a different way to produce a different output, I started going back up the stream and realizing that there was a lot more to it than that. A lot of organizational workflow streamlining needed to happen. And then once we got in there and took that apart, it came down to the individuals. And so you can put together a great plan, but if the people that are supposed to be executing that plan are showing up burnt out, stressed out, and overwhelmed because of everything they have going on in their life, you're not going to perform. And so I realized that in terms of helping these teams perform at a higher level, I was going to have to help them balance their work and life and find some harmony there, to use your word. So I had started already focusing on that, doing some sessions and workshops around it. But then the pandemic hit and these executives were asking me for even more help in that area for their teams. I started writing some essays, gathering some of the research that I'd found helpful to me over those dark days that I talked about. And then suddenly I realized this is maybe the makings of a book. And I had written 3 books before, and they were all focused on digital journalism, entrepreneurial journalism. It was all about being innovative in the space of journalism. And this time I realized what I needed to do was help people be innovative with the way they were approaching their work and life. So there is a bit of a through line there, even though my previous books were journalism textbooks used in college classrooms. And this one's really meant for every working professional. But at the end of the day, it was all about how do I help people with what I learned to help myself so that they can show up not only better at work and be higher performers, but then also show up better at home and be better parents and partners and spouses and friends and every other role that you have to play in your life.
And there's a lot of different things we have to do. And that's why it's important to figure out how do you create harmony within them all. Now, I've heard of the butterfly effect, which is basically, a butterfly on the other side of the world can flap its wings and create a tsunami on the other side of the planet, which for a lot of people is hard to believe. And we're not going to go into that. But what's the difference between the butterfly effect and what you're talking about, which is the butterfly impact?
So the butterfly impact is really my way of looking at the way you could apply the butterfly effect to your world. As you said, the butterfly effect, I think it's most famously referred to in the movie Jurassic Park. Jeff Goldblum has a quote in there, kind of paraphrasing that you just did. And it's part of chaos theory. It's, high level mathematics stuff I clearly don't understand. But the way I read it and the way I thought about it and applied it to my own life is that if you make small changes in your own life, your own personal routines, the way you go about your day, it can have a ripple effect and even a large impact downstream and further and far away from you. The key is to know that you can't actually control that. And that's one of the most misunderstood things about the butterfly effect is that nobody can make that butterfly flap its wings. But when I think about the butterfly impact and the way that a single individual can take charge of their morning routine, for example, and build in more time for them to reset their system, to find that space and calm and be more grounded, they're going to show up as a better partner and better teammate at work. And that positive reinforcement, that positive connection that the next person gets from them, they might pass that forward and on and on and on. And so really it's about choosing to make a positive impact on the people in your world and having the faith that they're going to then make a positive impact on the people in their world and so on and so on.
And that's important. It's little things, little baby steps add up to massive results over time. And you can't control the outcome, but you can control the step. And you do the best you can. It seems these days, everyone is always, I'm so busy. I'm so busy. And they feel proud of the fact that they're so busy. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, that's something I talk about in the book. In fact, the very first chapter is called The Cult of Busy, which is a term coined by my friend Scott Birkin, who's written several awesome books. And I loved how we framed that, because it really does become a badge of honor and almost a shield, that if you're so busy, that must mean A, you're valuable, and B, you don't have time for whoever's now sending you an email or texting you or calling you. And I have found in my life, and certainly when I was writing the book and trying to interview people, the people who had time right away, those are the people that you know are in control. Those are the people who you know have balance and have figured something out. The people that don't say they're too busy are the ones who are really winning the game. And so one of the concepts I write about in the book is called time affluence. And certainly on your show, you talk a lot about affluence in terms of financial affluence. And I love to think about it in terms of time. And if we think about the scale of people and who's doing better than another, the people who have time affluence, I would put at the top, because if you have the ability to choose what you're doing with your time, you're going to be able to have the opportunity to choose what you value, and you're going to make time for it, already have time for it. I think a lot of the folks that I work with, especially in my consulting job, they feel like they don't have control, and they feel like their calendar is not theirs. And so one of the recommendations that I always make to people is go as far out on your calendar as you can, where there's just white space, right? At some point, 3 months or 6 months down the road, you don't have a full stack of meetings on your calendar. So start there and start putting in, 30 minutes for lunch 3 days a week, or ending at 5 o'clock, go walk the dog, do yoga, whatever it is. But if you can build in those blocks of recharging and that self-help and that self-care that a lot of people talk about, then you'll get to realize some of the benefits, which will then, of course, make you want more. For a lot of people, getting started is so difficult because, as you say, they're just so busy. And they look at their calendar tomorrow or next week and they see no openings, no possibility to do anything different with their life. And so it really is about your routine and your habits. And that's something I know is talked about a lot on this show. But it does come down to what is just a few things or just one thing that you can put into your life or take out of your life, take off your schedule, that would be helpful in terms of restoring a little bit of space so that you feel like you're not as busy.
And so on the show, we come at it from the core of money, but we also understand the balance between money and time. And when you have money, you can create time freedom. And that's the way I've always lived my life, is I wanted financial freedom and time freedom. And to me, financial freedom is time freedom because it allows you to do that. And when I create my calendar, while other people can put things on my calendar, they are limited. Like, there are limited blocks when they can do it. There are days where I don't normally schedule things. And even when someone schedules, it automatically puts in a buffer so that I have time between things just naturally there. And I've built it intentionally that way. And I think that, and I've said it many times, the thing people don't realize is the value of time. They're valuing their money much more than they're valuing their time. And then they struggle. And I think in the book, there was a quote from a Yale professor, Laurie Santos, and it said, in general, those that are valuing time are overall happier than those who are valuing money. And the reality is, the studies show once you hit a certain money level, there's no more happiness. Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. It's a matter of what are you doing with your time, and even creating just some free space in your day. Because I know there's plenty of research around when do good ideas come to you. They don't come to you when you're stressed out about answering this email before you get to that phone call, before you jump on this meeting, right? There's no space there for a good idea to come to you. Lin-Manuel Miranda is famous for having the idea for Hamilton come to him while he was on vacation. And he is very proud of the fact, he's talked about this a number of times, that there's no chance that would have come to his brain if he were not unplugged and sitting on a lounge chair and reading the Alexander Hamilton biography. So it is important to create that space, but also to value that. And so as you talk about the value of time versus money in a corporate culture, what I run into is the challenge of that cult of busy that we were talking about earlier, where someone shows up to a Zoom call and, is talking about how they haven't had time to eat today and they're starving because they've just had back-to-back Zoom calls. Well, the way the culture should be, and the culture that I'm seeing starting to emerge, and this is one of maybe the silver linings of the pandemic, is the person who comes on to the Zoom call and is proud of the fact that they took a break for lunch, is proud of the fact that they maybe even, I heard this just the other day on a Zoom call, someone came on to the meeting and was proud of the fact they just finished this 10-minute meditation. And they talked about that in a culture that honestly, pre-pandemic, that would have never happened. So I do feel like the pandemic and quarantine and that reset that we all were given, whether we wanted it or not, allowed people to reconsider where they're spending their time. If you were doing a brutal commute and suddenly you were not, you started to think about, okay, what else am I doing with that time? What else should I be doing with that time, or could I be doing with that time? I know parents who maybe didn't have to go to all those soccer games and dance recitals thought, what else should my kids be involved in? And so it was this interesting opportunity. Again, not that any of us wanted the pandemic, but it did give a lot of people the chance to reconsider for the first time, am I spending my time on things I value? And is that making me feel like I'm in alignment with my values? And I think that's, to answer your question, what really gets to the feeling of time affluence is if you feel like your time is being spent on what you value.
That requires people to know what they value, first and foremost, and to decide what that is, and then to figure out how to live in alignment with that. But before we get on to that, COVID was a crisis, and I know you say never waste a good crisis. What did you mean by that?
Well, that's something that's been tossed around over a few decades now. I was trying to research the origin of that quote. I got back to the 1970s, I think. And anyway, a lot of people have said it over the years. And one of the examples I have in the book is from my best friend who happens to own a successful brewery here in Seattle. And when the pandemic hit, 90% of his revenue was coming from restaurants and bars. And he had to pivot quickly and start canning beer and getting it into stores. And so 6 months later, he was able to claim that 90% of his revenue was coming from cans. And so his business was completely transformed. And then, of course, as bars and restaurants started to open up, that channel in his market opened up as well. So the business was transformed because of a crisis. And so anytime there's a crisis, an emergency, you can do one of two things, right? And I think I talked about in a quote how John F. Kennedy once famously said, and he was just translating the Japanese character for crisis, and it's one part danger and one part opportunity. And so that's the way to look at it. So even when I think about my own personal life and a couple of the crises that I went through, I had an option there. I could have just sort of folded up the tents and decided that, my life is doomed and there's nothing to do here but be sad. And I certainly did that for a while. But in the end, I realized this is an opportunity to learn about what is inside of me. What can I bring to others? How do I take this opportunity to do all this research, all this introspection, all of this deep emotional and some psychological work, and turn it into something that helps other people? And that, in the end, became a big part of the Butterfly Impact, the new book. I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time, but in the back of my mind, I always felt like this is a ton of work that I'm doing right now to get myself back up on my feet. And I am not going to waste this. I'm going to share it with other people once I get there. It took a while to get there, but once I got there, I knew I wanted to share it with other people.
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. So throughout the book, you interviewed probably over 100 people. Is there a favorite story or a favorite something that came out of the book that you really resonated with you?
That's a tough question because, of course, I love all the stories in the book. You're making me ask, what's your favorite child, right? No, there's no favorite child in the family.
Maybe there's a favorite lesson.
There is a favorite lesson, and I think it goes back to, it really does align with where we started this conversation, focusing on how much money do you need to be happy in your life? And in one of the chapters, I write about April Coble, who is one of the best, if not the best, female water skiers of all time. And I met April because during quarantine, my water skiing partner and I started skiing enough to the point where, because we weren't doing work travel, so we suddenly had all this extra time affluence. And we thought, gosh, we should go to water ski camp and see what that's all about. And so we found this water ski camp in North Carolina and flew there last October. And we met April and her whole family. And the Coble family, 26 years ago, bought this former strip mine about an hour south of Raleigh, North Carolina. And the EPA had closed it down over 20 years. The strip mines filled up with water, became the perfect water skiing lakes. She had just graduated from the University of North Carolina. She was in pre-med, but then decided to take a year off to go help the family start this ski school. And she's been there ever since. So she had a passion for water skiing and for teaching and for competing. And she and her mom, even her mom, who's almost 80, still competes. So they're an amazing family, and they have chosen this life because it just felt right and it fit for them. And they were able to bring so much joy into other people's lives through this water ski school. Kids, they have a women's weekend. It really is an incredible place. So I just got to go back there 3 weeks ago, and it was our second time. It was obviously even better because we already knew a lot of the people. A lot of the people came back. And just to give you one example of the power of this particular place, this young woman, she was probably in her 30s. She and her husband came there for the first time. They're both doctors, and she had never water skied before. And her husband wanted her to learn, and she thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. The first day she got up on 2 skis. The second day she dropped one and was skiing on one. And then that night we were sitting around the campfire asking her, are you going to try to get up on one ski tomorrow? Which is really difficult for anyone who's ever seen it or tried it. And she said, yeah, I really am. I think this is really fun. And then she said, 6 years ago, I was in a wheelchair. And she told us how she had this nerve disorder that prevented her from walking or even wearing socks. And it was like, whoa, that's amazing. And she was doing her internship at that point, and her husband was taking care of her. He's telling us this story the next day when she did, in fact, get up on one ski on her third try, which is amazing. And he was talking about how he was working 120 hours a week and taking care of her. And now she's skiing. And it reminded me what April told me when I interviewed her for the book is she said, I was in pre-med in college and I thought I wanted to help people medically. But then I started teaching people to ski here and realized, oh, I get a healthy specimen here, but I can make a much bigger impact positively on their life by bringing them together and giving them this joy of learning this very difficult sport. So I'll pick that one.
I know a lot of doctors, and I talked to a lot of them when they were still towards the end of their medical training. And many of them are like stuck because they were told to go be a doctor, or society said be a doctor. And by the time they got through medical training and realized what it was all about, they realized that they now have limits, unfortunately. So I think she made the better choice.
Yes.
One of the things that there was a quote in the book, I think it's a conversation between you and Mike Sando. And I think it's around the theme of temporary incompetence. You can always find a reason to not do something that's new, Mike told you. When I look back, I can see how I limited myself so many times. And often you see a person who has great potential, but settles for what they are currently doing. You can't even see it in yourself because you've never been told to dream it. A lot of people don't know someone who took a chance. I'd love for you to expound on that conversation.
I mean, it's a great quote from Mike. He was a huge part of my early development in digital journalism. So I worked at this newspaper called the News Tribune in Tacoma, Washington, and was running their website and digital operations. And this is back before social media and blogging was the innovation at the time. And Mike had said, he was covering the Seattle Seahawks at the time, and he said, I want to do something, innovative, which is write a separate story for each of the draft picks on NFL draft weekend. And, this is, it's 15 years ago. So you have to kind of go back with me where, there wasn't this, wall-to-wall TV coverage on ESPN of the NFL draft like there is today. Anyway, he wanted to do that over the weekend. And I said, well, that's a great idea, but I'm going to set you up with a blog. And the funny part of the story is that I kind of was doing that mostly because I didn't want to have to work all weekend and publish his posts. And, but also I thought, you know what, I bet he would like to learn how to do this blogging thing. And so he reluctantly agreed. And on Monday we came together and he said, well, how did it go? And I said, it was awesome. And got way more audience than, our main news website or any of the news stories we did. You should keep doing it for at least this next week. And he was like, oh, I'm too busy. There's that thing again, too busy. And he was very prolific. He wrote 350 stories a year. He was, a guy who was very, he was just one of the best sports writers in the country already, even at a fairly small newspaper. And so what he was able to do with the blog is really expand into a new and emerging area. But it was only because he gave himself that chance. And I think it's interesting that as I was talking to him for this book, and our interview was in 2020, by then he'd already moved on to ESPN and then moved on to The Athletic, where he currently is a writer. And he's voted on the Hall of Fame and he's covered every Super Bowl the last 10 years. I mean, he's definitely hit the top of his profession. And I think a lot of it goes back to the risks that he took by starting this blog and continuing this blog and just being open-minded about where it could go and being open-minded about the fact that he was going to be uncomfortable with it for a while. And that goes to your question about temporary incompetence. It's something that organizational change management scholars have studied for a long time. And what prevents people from taking that risk, from making that change, is that comfort zone, frankly, where you're comfortable. And so I don't want to take that risk and go down into what is described as the valley of despair, where you kind of make this dip into this area where you're not good at what you're doing anymore. And for a lot of people, especially if you have your ego tied into your profession, being seen as temporarily incompetent is something that would prevent you from even taking that first step. And I think Mike looks back and sees that taking that first step opened up so many doors for him. And even though at first he didn't know what he was doing with that blogging software and he didn't know how to react to people who were commenting in real time on the posts he was making, what he learned from that, obviously propelled him into the top of his profession. So I think it's having the faith that to power through the incompetence and know that that leads to learning. And the only way to grow is by learning something new. But it does take that first step and takes that first leap of faith.
It's funny you mentioned that because 5 years ago, from when this is releasing, I was about to launch a podcast. No idea where it was going. Too busy, too much on my plate, trying to, I had kids stuff. It was the holidays, a million things to do. And I had a coach who said, let's just plan this out and do it. And I had no idea we'd end up here. And it's been an amazing journey. And it's because I took that first step and we tried it and we launched, and I had no idea where it was going to go. I said, we'll see. And here we are a couple hundred episodes later with a lot better skills and ability to do things than I had back then. And it works out. So I truly believe in what he says. You never know where it's going to take you, and you won't get there till you take the first step.
That's awesome. And probably looking back at it, it probably all looks like it was a perfect plan, you know, the way things have worked out, right? If you look at it in retrospect, a lot of these experiments that end up working out or taking you a place that you wanted to go, maybe you didn't even know you wanted to go there. And once you get there, you're like, oh yeah, I meant to come here. This is where I wanted to be.
I had no idea where we'd end up. I'll be honest, you know, but it worked out well. Nor did I, at that point, podcasting was still in its infancy. So I had no idea that it would grow to this level and it would be this mainstream in the future. So, but it all works out. One of the things you say is that work should be fun and sometimes funny. And that's not normally built into corporate culture. What do you mean by that?
It certainly is not. And it needs to be. There is a ton of research out there about the powerful effects of humor in the workplace, especially. It has been found time and again to reduce stress and increase creativity. And certainly now, in the age of the pandemic times and remote work and hybrid work and everything else that people are up against, I've never seen a greater need for less stress and more creativity than right now. So it's really important to make space and make it okay to have humor in the workplace. And it can be done real simply and doesn't even need to take that much time. I did a workshop a couple of weeks ago for my clients around this. And we, led off the session with a funny Zoom call video where they're doing kind of a parody with a Brady Bunch-like song. And just to look in the video panels and see the smiles on people's faces, it took 2 minutes. And just lightening the mood and lightening the cognitive load that people feel when they bounce from one Zoom meeting to the next meeting, there's a payoff there. And then as you think about incorporating, just some funny memes or funny pictures into presentations, just as a simple break to give your brain a break, can be really powerful. I also reference a piece of research in the book where they compared the same exact corporate presentation, the PowerPoint graphs and slides I'm talking about. And one presentation was done without humor and one presentation was done with just one joke at the end. And people found that one to be more credible. So it's not just a relief and an increase in creativity. As you know, as anyone who's ever watched TV commercials, it's the funny ones that make you remember them. And so if you're doing a presentation at work, it's in your best interest to put some humor in there if you can, to try to help, communicate the idea that you are trying to present. It is more effective that way. Now, having said all that, there is, of course, some risk to incorporating humor at work. And you have to obviously know where the boundaries are. And you certainly don't want to step across a line. And it's easy, though. For me, I think you just have to make fun of yourself because that's fair game for everybody.
And I guess if you do that, you can't get in trouble for being politically
I don't know if anyone has gotten in trouble with HR for mocking themselves in a meeting, but that's probably happened somewhere.
It is very, very possible. And Zoom is actually making things a little bit more fun than they have in the past, where you can actually play around and use different backgrounds and make it a little bit more fun. And I know when Zoom first came out, and I shouldn't say when Zoom first came out, I was on Zoom before the pandemic. When the pandemic first hit, picking a good virtual background, it brought a little bit of fun to it. I think people have probably gone away from that now. Maybe there's rules. I don't know what it is.
I don't see that as much anymore, or, Fun Shirt Friday, or, sports team shirts, or, bring your pets to the Zoom call. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can just incorporate a quick opportunity for everybody to smile, have a little bit of a laugh, a little bit of bonding. And it really does help. I know the teams that I work with have really appreciated the efforts, and those calls just, I don't know, they just have a different, mood around them, and they are more productive and more collaborative.
And part of that is probably we really haven't created that online culture, have we? Either you create culture or it creates itself. And it's important to do that. We kind of got thrown into the online world. And I know in the beginning, it was a real struggle for a lot of people because they're no longer at work. They're in their messy bedroom and they're trying to figure out, how do I make this work? How do I get technology and everything else that kind of needs to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the points in the book that I make is you are the culture. And I've worked with so many teams and individuals over the years who complain about the culture that they work within. And I always challenge them at some point and say, well, what are you doing to create the culture that you want? Because you can control your, eye rolls and your size and your yawns in the middle of a meeting. You can also control, like I said, inserting some humor and some fun into a team conversation or a Slack channel or an email. And so if people understand that they do at least have some say in the culture they operate in, they can start to make a positive change in that realm. And I think you're right with Zoom. Everyone tried to basically take the sort of stuffy setting of a corporate boardroom into this video call software. And then all of a sudden it became, well, I can't have my kid walk up to me, while I'm on the Zoom call, or have my dog bark in the background. And then over time, it suddenly was okay. And now, we see that, I see that anyway, more and more, and it's more comfortable. It's a little bit more relaxed. People feel okay if they're going to do a Zoom from someplace that isn't a perfect setting and may look like they're not exactly in their home office. And I think that should be part of your culture, or you can make it part of your culture if it's not. And I think there's a lot more opportunity for creativity in these work collaborations in a remote world. And we're just starting to really explore those possibilities right now.
And so that brings up another topic that you had in the book, which is whom you work with can make or break your experience. So how do we find the right people to work with and the right culture that we enjoy in the fun place?
Obviously, a lot of people do not have the power to determine exactly who they get to work with on a daily basis. But I think in most organizations, at least the ones I've worked in over the years, there's enough opportunity to find those people you really connect with who can really help you grow. And the people who give you energy and just sort of feed your spirit when you spend time with them and collaborate with them. And so prioritize those connections, prioritize those collaborations, spend the time, if you have discretionary time to spend, or pick people to work on projects with. Think intentionally about the people that you really like to be around, that you really like to share ideas with, the ones that you really learn from. And I don't know that people spend as much time trying to force themselves into scenarios that they know they will get a lot out of. It's a little bit like being back in grade school and you're picking teams for kickball. You always kick, the person who can kick the farthest first. Well, if you're going to start doing a project or you need feedback on an idea, maybe instead of going to the person that you always go to and that doesn't always go so well, like think creatively about who else you could talk to. Think creatively about what idea you need collaboration around, or just spin up a brand new idea because you know that there's a person who you want to collaborate with or a team that you want to collaborate with, and you want to get the benefit of that collaboration. So while you can't necessarily, especially if you're not the boss, hire and fire the people you like, you can certainly try to be a little bit more intentional about who you're spending time with and who you're collaborating with.
And I think part of that is getting out of your comfort zone too, right? Not going
Correct.
to the same places. And that's one of the things I was taught early on. If you're working in a large organization, to network, not at your level, but to literally reach out to all the top brass across multiple levels and go have coffee with them and not talk about you, but talk about what does their department do? What are the struggles they're facing with? What are they looking to accomplish in the next year? And when you start to go and have those conversations, number one, you get a bigger picture of the organization. Number two, you also create the opportunity to bring together the people you want to. So you're blurring all the lines that are there, and you don't have to be the boss to lead, to create culture, to bring about change. When you cross all these silly silos and boundaries, you can make change. And the next thing you know, you're the de facto leader at the bottom of the food chain.
Yeah, that's a really great point and a really great suggestion. And it also goes to something I write about in the book, which is to make sure that you're spending time with people outside of your group and outside of your own sort of demography. And it's important to spend time with younger, older, technical, managerial, administrative. I mean, there's so many different types of people in any organization. If you only spend time with people like you're going to be stuck in that comfort zone with a limited learning ability. Whereas if you get outside and walk in people's shoes, see what problems they're up against, it's going to invigorate your curiosity. It's going to stimulate your learning. It's going to obviously increase your experiences, and you're just going to make all those connections. And suddenly your name is going to be at the top of someone's head when a new project comes along that it's an opportunity that you wouldn't have been able to receive otherwise.
And that is very true. You shake things up, and that's where change happens.
Exactly.
So let's kind of take a little bit of a change in course here. Have you found any kind of link between physical activity and people's vitality towards life?
Absolutely. In my own world, for sure. And then really in most of the people that I'm around, I guess in my world, absolutely. I think that physical activity of any kind is critical to maintaining a healthy mind and a healthy approach, reducing stress, increasing creativity, and just being able to manage and have balance with everything that's being thrown at you. I tell people sometimes, about my own personal journey to exercise, which started out with one day a week. So it's like 20 years ago, probably, when my son was first born, and I would put him in the baby jogger one day a week and try to, head over to the YMCA in the neighborhood and get in on the workout. This is after several years of having that January New Year's resolution of I'm going to 5 days a week and run a marathon this year, just, fall flat on my face with those goals. So the one day a week became two became three. And, for at least 10 years, I've worked out 4 or 5, 6 days a week. But it was about that first step. And I think that's what some people struggle with, is realizing that you don't have to go from 0 to 60 on this, but it is important to do something every day. And it could be, and I was telling this to this group at Amazon list just last week, could be that extra 15 minutes you wake up early in the morning, just do some stretches, do some jumping jacks and sit-ups. You don't have to all of a sudden buy a Peloton bike and all of a sudden get in the race. But it does make a huge difference. And there's a ton of research out there that if you move your body, especially in the morning, before you're going to do a bunch of sedentary work, which a lot of professional workers do, it is really important. And it is mostly important for your head, a little bit for your body.
Yeah, I work out every morning before I get going. It's one of the first things I do. I would think working at Amazon, you could just go down to the warehouse and run around and fill a couple boxes a couple times a day, get a little jogging and movement in that way, and carrying maybe something heavy while you're there. Which kind of brings up the next point that I know you talked about, is gamification, turning a task into a game in order to motivate yourself to do it. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, this has been also, there's a lot of research behind this, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. If you can convince yourself to do something you don't want to do with the payoff of something you do want, turn it into that kind of a game, it obviously helps motivate you. So if it is doing that 10 minutes of exercise, and if you do, then you get your cup of coffee or something to that effect, I think it's a really helpful tool. For me, it's also effective if you track your system. So there's a lot of research around this. So if you want to give yourself a payoff on the weekend for working out, 5 days a week, and you get your little grid out and you're marking off the days, and then at the end of it, there's, a shopping spree to buy a new pair of shoes, that kind of motivation and that kind of game that you can play really helps change the dynamic. And so you're thinking about the shopping spree and going to buy the shoes on the weekend, and not necessarily about having to put your gym shoes on right now to go work out. So there's a lot of different ways to gamify the system. And there's a lot of apps out there that you can certainly download, a lot of free apps that will help track it and help make it a game for you. And so that is one of, I think, the more helpful advances of technology in terms of personal health. All started with the Fitbit and the step tracker. And if you had a goal of 10,000 steps a day, and that allowed you to get the glass of wine at dinner, that's a pretty good game.
And you said something important in there, and I know it's more so even in the book, which is creating systems. Because if you can implement the systems, you are bound to succeed every time as long as you continue to do it. And you'll get the results that the system produces. So pick good systems and put them to work.
Absolutely. And the system that I run into the most often with people that I'm talking to about this is that they don't have one. Their system is wake up, grab a phone, look at my email, do something that I need for my kid or feed myself or take a shower, look at my email, go to meetings, look at my email, pick up my kid, feed dinner, look at my email, and then the end of the day. And that's not a system. That is, that's prison. And so I was working with someone recently who has really young children, 1 and 3. They're both going to daycare. His wife works full time. And this was basically his quote unquote system. And I said, well, here's the thing. Why do you look at your email very first thing in the morning? And his reply and his logic was, I want to see what's there so that I can think about my responses while I'm driving my kids to daycare. I said, okay, I mean, that kind of makes sense to me, but here's another way to look at it. I said, what if instead of looking at that email, your brain gets a chance to reset? Your brain gets a chance to rest. Your brain gets a chance to be present in the moment with your children as you're getting them dressed and feeding them and getting them to school. And then you can start your brain on work stuff. You're going to find out that after a few days, your brain is going to feel so much more calm and grounded. And it's the metaphor I keep using. It's like hitting Control-Alt-Delete on your computer. You got to reset that system. And if you don't reset it, you know what happens to your computer over time. It just starts running slowly and more slowly and more slowly. And that's what's going to your nervous system right now if you never give it a chance and give it that space to reset.
That sounds like pure hell to me. It's like we don't look at emails and start responding till much later in the morning. And that's what you can train your people to say, hey, I look at emails at 10 a.m. Don't expect a response before then.
Yeah.
And I'm busy doing deep work. Have a nice day.
Right.
And you create your culture, too, in the way that you respond to people. And I think that's important.
And it's important to recognize that other people are going to have other systems, which is how we got here. Thank you for highlighting the importance of systems. I know you all talk about a lot on this show, but that is the key. It's your habits, your system, and it's something that's repeatable every day. But it's also something that I, try to help people understand is something that you can go away from a day or two. Something comes up, you're traveling, whatever, you're not feeling the best. That's okay. Give yourself some grace and just get back to it as soon as you can. But the fact that you establish the system and you go with it, right? Your 10 a.m. email, well, maybe there's a huge project and tomorrow you're doing emails at 8 a.m. That's okay. But sort of the default is 10 a.m. And so as long as your default is a healthy system, you can go away from it and come back to it. And in the end, it all balances out and puts you in a better place.
Yeah, the rule is when we travel, exercise and diet go out the door.
And you don't feel bad about it, right?
No, not at all. It's like, hey, I'm traveling. I'm going to enjoy food. I'm not going to worry about working out. If I get a workout in, great. If I eat healthy, great. But if I splurge, so be it. your body needs that as well. And so
Yep.
I'm cool with it.
Yeah, I agree.
Based on our conversation, what's one action step people can take to move forward this week?
I think the action step that I recommend most often is to make sure that the start and stop of your workday are healthy and they are what you want. And so we just talked about an example for the morning routine. But if there's anything in your life and anything you value that is not currently in your life, find a way to put them into the start and the end of your workday, one or the other, both if you can. But those things happen every day. You start your work, you end your work. And so that's your opportunity to sort of, it's called habit stacking. And so for me, one of the people that I interviewed during the book gave me a tip that I still use, which is to close the laptop by 5:00 every day. And at 5:00, most often I will put in a podcast and walk around the neighborhood, because two of the things that I value are fresh air, getting some steps in around the neighborhood. I like walking around my neighborhood and listening to a new podcast and learning something new. And just by making that time available for that, not only did it create a really healthy boundary between my work and the rest of my day, but now I'm doing these things that I've said I value. Some people like to say, God, I wish I had more time to read. Well, make that time. 15 minutes in the morning before you start your work, pick up that book and read some more. And so any one of those opportunities at the beginning and the end of your day, find something that you don't feel like you have enough time for and add it in there and make that, tied to the beginning or end of your workday, I think is a really healthy place to start.
And I think it's good, especially now that more and more people are working from home, having the boundary in the morning and the boundary in the evening and shutting it off. And if you can, creating a separate space for work so that you can shut the door and walk away. And I think that becomes more and more important than ever.
Absolutely.
The pandemic has also helped people to examine parts of their life so they have a better chance to say, what do I really want going forward?
Yes, couldn't agree more.
It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
The secret is, it's probably not much of a secret. I think it is about making sure that what I value, from personal and physical and mental health to experiences and learning, are all blended and are my priority. And so I think learning is probably the best. If I had to pick one, it'd probably be, lifelong learning. I feel abundant as I continue to learn new things and really share those learnings. So it's, I guess, two steps there. It feels abundant when I've learned something new that I know is helpful for me, but I know is helpful for others. And I'm able to share that, and it makes an impact on their life too.
So that comes back to where we started with the word harmony. Like for me, I love to learn, and that's all well and good, but then you have to apply. And so creating a life where you get to learn and apply and do what you love and have fun, that to me, and have the time and make lots of money, that's perfect harmony. That's where I'm at. And so life is good.
Life is good. Yes.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
To not take myself so seriously. I think I was caught up in trying to achieve and get to that next step and that next level in a way that wasn't very healthy and was too much driven by ego. And so I think if I could go back and convince myself of anything, it would be to slow down and to not take myself as seriously and just in terms of understanding that where you are is fine right now, and be present and enjoy it and learn what you can, and things will move forward as they move forward, and don't force it. Wait for it to happen and I think just a matter of going back again and understanding. I still work on this, but it really is a matter of like, I'm good. Like today is good. I've got a lot of things to be grateful for. And, I feel proud of the work that I'm doing and the impact I'm having on others. And that should be good. And that's enough. And 20 years ago, it just wasn't for some reason.
That's the problem with youth. Speaking of youth, if you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Well, I have an 18-year-old in my house right now. So he would probably say something to the effect of life is a balance, which is something I've been saying for a long, long time. And what I mean by that is you can't have too much downtime, but you also can't have too much uptime. And so there is this balance that you want to strike. And I know that balance has kind of turned into harmony these days, but for me, it really is about recognizing both have a role, a symbiotic role in your life, play and work. Work hard, play hard. And that saying's been around forever. And I feel like I've done really well with that recently. So I feel proud of my attempt to work hard and play hard. And I know it's pretty trite and not too novel, but that really is the secret, I think, to an abundant life, to go back to your first question.
And that sounds like great advice. And it's good that he's learning it at a young age.
He's learning it. I'm not sure he's applying it yet. He's doing good on the play hard. It's the work hard that we're still working on.
Yeah, that's what happens when you're 18, right? You get to play hard.
Exactly.
If people would like to learn more about you, find your book, what's the best way for them to do all of that?
The book is on Amazon. It's called The Butterfly Impact. I have a website, butterfly-impact.com, and feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, Mark Briggs.
And we will put links to all of that in the show notes to make it easy for people to find you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this. Great conversation.
Harmony in life is key. What are you doing to define what that looks like for you? You get to choose what 2022 looks like. And you can start by taking small steps in the direction you want to go. Too often we give up our power, and there's no need to do that. We can take control while we still have the time left, and we can build our ultimate life. We can have time affluence and financial affluence. It is possible. This week's action step was to figure out the start and stop of your workday and to create that healthy separation based on what you want. We need to transition in and out of work. And with many of us working from home, that line gets blurred. Learning to shut down and relax is important. So the big question is what can you do to make a small change in your world? Everyone tries to make big changes, but small changes compound over time. And next week, I'm going to chat about that as we look back over the past 5 years of the podcast and see what we've learned from our guests. Stay tuned. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.